Jordan Maxwell, and I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is the Conspiracy Con 2005, the main speaker's room, and the speaker next is a dear friend of mine, a man who has continued the kind of research that I've been doing for many years. He's one of the few speakers that speaks on the subject that we do that has actually a really deep spiritual understanding of the subject. Many people talk about it academically, but few really understand the dark, mystical, secret establishment behind the subject of symbols and emblems and words and terms. And Michael Tsarion has distinguished himself in my eyes as being a man of true spiritual understanding, and this is what makes his work so important in my view. It's both an honor and a pleasure to present my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Michael Tsarion.
Thank you, Jordan. See you later. Thank you, Jordan. That's fine praise coming from the man who alone deserves the title of the world's most controversial speaker. It's good to be back with you all again for another year, remarkably, of Conspiracy Con. And I'd like to thank you all for being here for the conference and to be with me now. I'd also like to especially thank Brian Hall for, again, working his ass off to pull this event together. It's a remarkable event. It's about truth. And I think that I personally want to thank him. And I think we should all thank him with some applause for that. And I know that by all of you coming here also, by attending here, it's a sign. It's a sign of your own desire, your passionate desire for truth, for the real meaning. You're supporting us, the researchers and the disseminators of truth. Not conspiracy theories, but the disseminators of truth, the research community, those who've looked into the matters that lie behind the veil of appearance. But your support of that shows your commitment, your ultimate commitment to that journey. Because you're distinguishing yourself from that mass of smiling depressives out there who are happy to learn more and more about less and less until they end up knowing a lot about nothing. That's what's happening by way of the media. You're part of the people who want to expose this faux democracy of this two-party system. Because that's coming down on us now. We have also the rise of fundamental evangelist Christian paradigms again. Because that's a form of mind control that's worked for 2,000 years, and it's back. So why reinvent the wheel, right? That's worked for thousands of years. Well, you wheel it out again. And we have to offset that. They have their own particular brand of sick theology that's helped drug the mass, drug the human child. And now, because of the age that we're in, I'll be sharing more about that later, the astrological time that we're in, because we're in an age of awakening, because the child of humanity is ready to wake, he's straining at his chains, they're ready there with the injection for yet a larger dose of mind control, a larger dose of toxic, mind control drug, so to keep you down. So you're straining at your chains, and they're ready to administer yet more of their poison. The patient, as he struggles to release himself, the more you struggle to release yourself, the more you're in danger, of a greater barrage of toxicity. Now, as Jordan has said many times, we're not going to understand the world we're living in unless we do understand the past. And anyone who's read my book on Atlantis, almost on the first page there, I even echo that and repeat that and say that, in fact, we better realize that even things that we have taken as being mythologies, things that we consider to be myths, they're about to happen. Things that we take for mythologies. St. George and his dragon, right? The fall of Lucifer. Things we think are of the past. They're far from of the past. They might even be things of the future. I know that sounds like a paradox, but think about it. Now, the title of tonight's talk is The Origins of Evil. And if that sounds heavy, it is. I've got some fascinating things to share, and around about the middle of the presentation also, I'll be sharing something of the greatest importance with you concerning the origins of evil and concerning the climate that we find ourselves in politically. During the talk, you're going to discover, when you walk out that door, you will be in no doubt about it. If your ears are open, you're paying attention. By the time you walk out that door, you will know today why evil is in the world. I have been questioning that question since as far back as I can remember. It's what got me into all of this. The question of evil should be on the minds of every single human being in the world. It's not on the minds of everybody in the world, but it damn well should be. And if we don't resolve that and find out why we are so inhuman, where this injustice, cruelty, sadism comes from, we are actually bequeathing that question to our children. And everything else rests upon the foundation of that. Our empowerment lies on that question. And I have dedicated my whole life to that research with the help of mentors like Jordan. We've been asking the same questions, we've been asking the right questions. Because within the understanding of that is the secret to bring this Goliath down. And it won't be the first time that a small band of outlaws has brought down an empire, an evil empire. And it won't be the first time that a giant has been destroyed by a boy with a simple weapon. That boy is America. That boy is the people sitting right here. The intelligence community are you. When you know what the truth is and how to use it. But this story of the origins of evil starts in the past. So let's start at the beginning. Robert, if you want to, we can begin. Now, if you look up the term conspiracy theory, it actually is a legitimate sociological term, by the way. And you can go to a sociological dictionary, a thing called a sociological dictionary, like the Collins Sociological Dictionary, and look up the term conspiracy theory. And it's perfectly understood to sociologists what that means. There's nothing negative or reprehensible about it. And in the caption, it usually says that a conspiracy theory is only something reprehensible if two things happen. One is if it is delivered in an outlandish, irrational manner. And B, if it is delivered without any decent proof or evidence. Now, as all of you have seen by being here just in the last couple of days, have you not heard eloquence from this podium? You've heard incredible eloquence. And you'll hear that from me. And you have also heard a lot of them back it up with, resources. And my work fits into that category too. I will present it in an eloquent way, and you will be given the proof. It's on the website, it's in my book, and, there are sources. But as a matter of fact, you actually don't even have to be, you or your neighbors, into conspiracy theories at all. All you have to do to be here tonight or be into the subject matter is want to make sense of the world that you're living in. Now, you want to have to make sense of it rationally and passionately, I'm saying, not just because, your life sucks and you want some answers. No, I mean with the whole of your being. You want answers to this mystery that we call life, that we are participating in, extraordinary beings living a very ordinary, thinking we're living an ordinary life. Now, if you want answers to the world out there, you probably discovered by now that the corporate media ain't helping. Now, they're not only not going to help, they're going to make it worse. So that's why you have to pick up the slack on your own time, obviously, and come here. Now, Jordan asked an important question at last year's Conspiracy Con. He's asked it since 1992, and probably in his own life, God knows how far back, he's been asking the same question. Very similar question to what I've been asking after years of researching this particular subject of secret societies, fraternities, whatnot. And that is, look, and I mean, the symbolism shows you already that something's up. If there are lower rungs, if there's lower tiers of the great power pyramid, then who is at the top of the power pyramid? You can't study this subject very long before you'll actually start asking that question. It's a good question. It needs to be answered. Who is at the top? Who is this? Jordan says it definitely could not be a human intelligence, and I absolutely concur with that point. That it's not human because it's too smart. It's too intelligent. If you don't believe it, they're happy to tell you that themselves. One of the most powerful secret societies in the world, not the only one, but one of the most powerful one, was called the Bavarian Illuminati. Please excuse me if you're familiar with some of this material, but I'm assuming that people here tonight are for the first time. Welcome. You came here for truth, you're going to get it. Well, one of the most powerful secret societies in the world was called the Bavarian Illuminati. It was founded by a German called Adam Weishaupt, but the mantle later passed to the famous Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini. Let's read his own words about his order. these secret societies. He says, we form an association of brothers in all points of the globe, yet there is one unseen that can hardly be felt. Yet it weighs on us. Whence comes it? Where is it? No one knows, or at least no one tells. This association is secret even to us, the veterans of the secret societies. The head of the Illuminati is telling you there's something above us. 1700s. Well, let's come up a little bit more to date. American history, Walter Rathenau, German General Electric, a man who had a lot of say in American politics. 300 men, he says, all of whom know one another, direct the economic destiny of Europe and choose their successors from among themselves. Joseph Kennedy, and he should know, said that 50 men have run America, and that's a high figure. Benjamin Disraeli, the first Jewish Prime Minister of England, who spent his life uncovering the network of subversive organizations, said the world is run by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. And your own Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, he said that the real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. Senator Inouye says that there exists a shadowy government with its own air force, its own navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideals of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. Hell, they created the law. You think they're bound by it? Think again. You're bound by it. They'll kick your door in. But you can't even stop them from the atrocities they're perpetrating on the world. Not yet, anyway. And as a general rule of thumb, to those who have studied this and are also beginning their study in this, let's just realize when it comes to these power hierarchies at the top of the pyramid that I'm talking about, as a general rule of thumb, it's not 100% true, but it's about 90% true. If you happen to see the rulers, the controllers, the kings, the princes, the dukes in the media, that means in magazines and newspapers and in encyclopedias and so forth, and history books and on TV, chances are they are not the architects of the programs and the policies that they are instigating. They are just what I refer to as the people's champions. They are just what I refer to in the book as overworld figures. With very few exceptions, they are not the architects of doom. I have a DVD coming out next year called Evil's Willing Servants, which will tell you who are the architects. That's a sort of a missing piece. But just for now, know that if you see them on, the fact that you just see them on television, or the fact that you see them in the common media, they're lower henchmen. Never forget that. It'll empower you to know that, because they are not the henchmen. They're power, drug, sick, perverted, toxic individuals who serve powers behind the scenes. There's no reason in the world to fear them. The symbolism confirms what I'm saying. Symbolism, the key is symbolism, symbol literacy. They may appear on paper, of course, as, at each other's throats, different parties, different networks, all appearing to have this faux democracy, this faux conflict. But as the symbolism clearly shows you, they all sit at Cecil Rhodes' round table. They all are comfortable, the criminals of the world, pretending through their faux conflict that the ship of state is also difficult to run and the human race is just so hard to rein in and keep them all under order. We have to prevent war and bring peace. It's so damn difficult. Look at how difficult our job is. But whose table are they sitting around? What are the symbols telling you at the G7 summit? On paper, again, it appears to be a two-party system. Is it? They're happy to tell you actually it's not. They're not going to tell you that verbally, but they're certainly going to tell you in other ways by the symbolism that they use, which I hope that most people in this room are able to decode. But think of the mass of humanity who are not. Ancient symbols being used in modern context, all over the media, all over the world. Languages, words, symbols, that we need to be able to understand what they mean. Doesn't mean the symbol inherently is negative, but it ties in with the fact that they have obediences and allegiances. Not only are these individuals using ancient sacred symbols, but they are a one-party system. Whatever way the coin falls, they win. But more than just using, sacred power symbols and whatnot, these individuals have hidden allegiances that you and I are not meant to know about. So, what allegiances? Well, if I'm making a promise to you, but I've got my fingers crossed behind my back, how good is that promise? Well, these characters have very much got their fingers crossed behind their back. They have allegiances, all right, that come before their allegiance to humanity and to the world and to the professed stuff that they're talking about. Here's a perfect example. In Washington, D.C., the statue of George Washington. The whole story is shown to you here. Let's read it. George Washington, it says under the plinth, underneath the bust, Freemason and first president. Let's read it again. Freemason and first president. Now, I'm not even American. I'm actually from Belfast. But I take offense to that statement. Should it not be first president and Freemason? It should be, but they're telling you how the pecking order works. What comes first? And underneath you have the Masonic G. So these behind-the-scenes allegiances come before, and you need to know about it. That's why you never get justice in the courts. That's why you never see any of these people are brought to justice, because of their allegiances that you need to know about that come long before their allegiances to you. Now, in the inception, let's not forget that your greatest enemy of this country wasn't the French, wasn't the Russians, wasn't the outer Mongolians, wasn't the Iraqis, it wasn't the Afghanis, wasn't the Arabs. Oh, guess what? Look it up in a history book. You tell me, who is your first enemy? England, Britain. Now, the British royals were not worried that force of arms had not secured America for them, right? Because basically they got their ass whipped 200 years ago. Don't let's get started with wondering what happened to America in the meantime to become so complacent. Let's leave that one aside. But armed force, they realized, was only one of many insidious strategies that the royals and their henchmen have used to undermine any rival. The Fabians were sent in as agents in the following years to do their work. Okay, they got plenty of other strategies. So President McKinley, Henry Ford, Howard Hughes, Charles Lindbergh Sr., Senator Joe McCarthy, and anyone else who knew what was happening were either politically or even physically assassinated. Now, who are these Fabians? They're a wing of the secret societies. And they believe in what's called the war of attrition. You should write that down. The war of attrition is very important. The Fabian Society, founded in 1883, played a catalytic role preaching the inevitability of gradualness in the movement towards a socialist society. Socialist is a secret society term, by the way, not a political term. We'll come to that later. Taking their name from the Roman warrior Fabius, who learned to wait patiently before striking a fatal blow against Hannibal. Hannibal is charging over mountains. Hannibal is plowing through jungles. He's hauling elephants across Asia Minor. He's busy crossing lakes. Well, Fabius is sitting whittling on a piece of wood, waiting patiently. Right? The spider in the web. Originally, before and during the American War of Independence, relations were good, very good, with many other powerful nations, like Russia, like France and Germany. People looked to America with respect and admiration. But the Vatican and the British had a great deal to lose if the world's other nations and governments began to base their political systems, you see, on the original American model, which was scintillating. The whole eyes of the world was watching. The Tsar was sending you ships in the War of Independence. Relations were good. Instead of a Cold War, which you had to endure, your forefathers had to endure lasting generations, what would have happened if the admiring Tsar of Russia had modeled his rule, right? He was getting ready to do it, by the way, before the Bolsheviks moved in. But what would have happened if he had totally based his rule on the American system? And what would have happened, may I ask, to Vatican-controlled South America had North America remained sovereign and solvent up here, right? All that mind control down there under the name of religion. What do you think would have happened down there to that country had America been a shining example? You think that the British and that the Vatican could, tolerate that? The American Democratic Party originally was called the Democratic Society. It's actually an offshoot of the Jacobin Club or the Jacobin Society, which is nothing more than the Illuminati that we've been talking about. The Illuminati's main tentacle operating in the political domain is known in England as the Fabian Society. Their socialist, so-called progressive, but it's really a pseudo-progressive ideology, is disseminated by the Democratic parties and their other left-wing interests. The main idea was that the Democratic Party would be so habitually dysfunctional, falling over themselves like the Keystone Cops, that it would not affect the changes that it espoused, the wonderful changes. In England, they had to have a socialist so-called party. You know why? Because soldiers were coming back from hells that you can't even imagine, coming back to empty towns where their whole bloodline had been wiped out. Revolution was rampant. They couldn't be, and so the government realized we better do something to appease this because they're ready to. We're still living in our mansions, remember? Ever been to England? Think if you're a soldier who's watched your comrades die on the fields of Flanders, in the fields of France, coming home and still watching these regents in luxury there. What were you going to do? Think of England in those days, what was going to happen. So they appeased the situation by giving you some welfare, giving you some free housing, a car that's practically useless, and a few other, little benefits to appease the foment that was coming. But this party would become so ineffectual and counterproductive that even the most reprehensible forms of conservatism would in fact gain support. The neoconservatism of the present-day Bush dynasty couldn't have existed without this intentional capitulation. This was recently made evident in the last election. It was part of the meta plan that Kerry would be, quote-unquote wishy-washy and a flip-flopper. Now, the man, again, an overworld figure, don't get me wrong, this man is not the creator of the Fabian Society, but he's technically its leader. From the London School of Economics, leader of the Fabian Society, Sidney West. Let's listen to the man himself. He says, to play those millions of minds, to watch them, and there's the word, the key word, slowly, remember, Fabian? To watch them slowly respond to an unseen stimulus, to guide their aspirations without their knowledge. All this, whether in high capacities or in humble, is a big and endless game of chess of ever extraordinary excitement. They get a kick out of it. That's the way a doctor in a laboratory talks about the rats when he walks in the morning. The Fabian Society infiltrated a group known as Theosophy, a very sacred order created by one of the most powerful female personages the world has ever played host to, Madame Blavatsky. Researchers who have not done their homework blame her for many of the machinations of the Fabian Society. That is erroneous and is karmically reprehensible to blame beings of the light when you haven't bothered doing your homework. This woman went blue in the face, warning that her society was being taken over, warning against combining spirituality and politics. She would have turned over in her grave to what happened next. But you see, she had already created a perfect edifice where the princes and the dukes and the intelligentsia of the world were already members. So the insidious force that wanted to move in, why reinvent the wheel? Move in and take over. It's ready and waiting. A British intelligence operation, says James Wardner in his fine book Unholy Alliance. He says, swept Madame Blavatsky aside and she was replaced by the British Fabian Society co-founder Annie Besant. Foster Bailey, a 33rd degree Mason, was a leader of that society. His wife, Alice A. Bailey, founded what's known as the Lucifer Trust. Alice Bailey was in the broad circles of society around Queen Victoria, and she always sought the wealthy and titled converts. In her own words, listen to this. She says, behind the division of humanity stand those enlightened ones. All right? So now she's talking about enlightened ones. Whose right and privilege it is to watch over human evolution and guide the destinies of men. This they do through the implanting of ideas in the minds of the world thinkers, so that these ideas in due time receive recognition and eventually become the controlling factors in human life. They train the members of the new group of world servers in the task of changing these ideas into ideals. These in turn become the desired objectives of the thinkers and are then taught to the powerful middle class and worked up into world forms of governments or religion, thus forming the basis, and she wrote this at the turn of the century, of the new world order. What's basically this caption telling us? That there's some on high force, the enlightened ones. Remember again the reference? And they are affecting by means unknown to us those policies that, as I'm saying, the characters of the people's champions put into work. Now, as we know, they moved in and took over the reins of the American government through the years. And, of course, you've listened to many other speakers talk about this. But we want to look for a moment at these American contacts and at the hidden enemies that operate here. Because your dollar bill, as I hope you know by now, and also your cities, and many, many of the other symbols of state and government bear these secret society emblems, coming out of Egypt, but also coming out of the secret society world. On your dollar bill, you have the Illuminati symbol of the pyramid. The Illuminati was founded, as I said a little earlier, by Adam Weishaupt. But when he passed on, the mantle moved to Giuseppe Mazzini, and finally moved to the man on the right, Albert Pike. Every single human being in America should know the name Albert Pike, and very few do. We're talking, you think that the George Bushes and the Clintons and the Roosevelts, and you don't know about Albert Pike? These are the hidden ones that shape the world events. But we almost know nothing about them. Albert Pike is a seminal figure in the creation of the Ku Klux Klan, by the way. George Washington said that I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan of the Illuminati. Now, your neighbor won't believe you. He'll call you a crank. But, the fact is that even George Washington was all knowing about it. It was not my intention, he says, to, doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary. No one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. Joseph Willard, the president of Harvard University, spoken at the time of his retirement, he says there is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. We live in an alarming period. The enemies of all order are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our republican government would be annihilated. Now, just like I was explaining about the Theosophy, the mystical organization that was infiltrated by this Lucifer trust, so Freemasonry, which once was a great archive of knowledge, a mystical doctrine, coming out of the ancient world, preserving many metaphysical secrets about the human body and about our relationship with the Creator. That was also infiltrated. Well, why not? If I was them, I'd probably want to do it. There it is, ready and waiting. All set up. So this group of the Illuminati were able to infiltrate that as well. We'll read that in a minute. But the thing is that it alarmed not only George Washington, but the head of World Freemasonry, Grand Orient Freemasonry at the time, was the Duke of Brunswick in the 1700s. And he actually stood up publicly and asked for the worldwide disbandment of Freemasonry because he understood that it was being infiltrated in this way. We're going to read a caption together from the Duke of Brunswick. And I want you to pay particular attention not only to what he's saying, but the way that he is saying it. Because that is an incredible modern appeal. He says, I have been convinced that we, as an order, have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic. That is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that the order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. John Robinson, a Scottish man who wrote the first book exposing them, its date is 1798, so just don't think this is a modern thing of the 20th century. John Robinson was approached by, very much in the same way as Anthony Sutton in this country was approached. John Robinson was approached by members of the Illuminati that they wanted intelligentsia. He was a university teacher, you see. He kind of looked into it, and as soon as he found out what was going on, he not only didn't join, he exposed it in an incredible book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. And he quotes Adam Weishaupt, who said that the great strength of our order lies in its concealment, that it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it. He goes on to say in another place, these good folks swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait. But this sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last. Well, don't you have fraternities and grades from school upwards, where the same policy goes? I don't know if you know how much women played a role in the exposure to secret societies. You need to know about Madame Blavatsky. You need to know about Nesta Webster. And you need to know about Edith Starr Mill or Lady Queensborough. In her book, she says, at the turn of the century, she says, we must allow, quoting from Weishaupt, we must allow all the federations to continue just as they are, with their systems, their central authorities, and their diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same right, organized as they are at present. But we must create a super right, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree, whom we shall select. Through this supreme right, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown. So, yes, full circle. All of these individuals, and in my other work, it's just voluminous how much information we've got on this, that they are talking about a hierarchy. The symbols tell you alone. There it is, the two-dimensional, removed 14th level. With the eye, which I believe is the eye of Aton, the solar cult eye, officiating over the lower ranks. So just, no doubt about it, should there be. My work has been to expose exactly who those controllers are. And that journey took me into some mighty interesting avenues, I can tell you. To find out that, in fact, they are not necessarily human, but they are a coterie descended from, bloodline descended from, alien visitors from other planets. What? That's right. Alien visitors from other planets who visited our planet approximately between 30 and 50,000 years ago. And their interference in our destiny and the manipulation of history, we all need to really know about. We really have to understand this if we're going to make sense of our world. These individuals influenced our culture, our science. For instance, as Lawrence Gardner says, it took man over 1 million years to progress from using stones as he found them to the realization that they could be chipped and flaked to better purpose. It then took another 500,000 years before Neanderthal man mastered the concept of stone tools, and a further 50,000 years before crops were cultivated and metallurgy was discovered. Hence, he says, by all scales of evolutionary reckoning, we should still be as far removed from any basic understanding of mathematics, engineering, or science, but here we are, a mere 7,000 years later, landing probes on Mars. And he asked the all-important question, so how did we inherit this wisdom, and from whom? And then, just in case, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just in case anybody's just straight in off the street and thinks that no alien visitors could ever visit this planet, they better read what Dr. Harrison H. Brown says from CIT. He estimates that virtually every star in our galaxy has a planetary system, in each of which 2 or 4 planets might have an Earth-like environment and chemistry that encourages our kind of life to exist. He gives the enormous figure of 100 billion stars with planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and get this, there are 450 billion of those galaxies. If that makes you feel small, good. But we don't have to look to scientists for that. My work is entirely based on the mythologies, of the ancient world, the legends. Oh yeah, they used to say it as old wives' tales, so nobody paid it any mind. But we don't have to look to science to wait to tell us what our forefathers were telling us all along. The scriptures, the apocryphal works, the Gnostic texts. Isaiah 13, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, to destroy the whole land. Isaiah 6, who are these that fly in a cloud as the doves to their windows? Well, who indeed? They're known by many names all over the culture. Jack Barringer, a researcher in this very subject, who wrote a book called Past Shock, he says that there's at least 30,000 texts. And that's only the texts that are left after all the burnings and purgings. There's still in existence at least 30,000 texts talking about this visitation. And every single culture in the world, almost bar none, revealed them. The Nephilim, the Anakim, the giants, the Titans. The Indians know them as the Nagas. The Irish knew them as the Nadreds, which is a word that means serpent. And more recently, they're known as the Brotherhood of the Snake or the Serpent people. And we'll explain that why, because there's been a lot of disinformation about that from certain people within the research community. We'll clear that one up today, too. The word Nephilim, actually, which is the most common name for these individuals, the etymology of Nephilim is uncertain, but the following explanations have been advanced. First, it may derive from nifal, which is a verb, from the verb to be extraordinary, or the extraordinary men. It may derive from the verb en-napal, which means the fallen ones from heaven. Supernatural beings, you see, although it could mean morally fallen men. Take your pick. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia defines it as meaning unnaturally begotten men, bastards. From Nephel, abortion or miscarriage. Most modern versions of the Bible have left the word untranslated. The word also may come from Nephel, which means bad or strange birth, as I said, or from Kenephilim, which means the serpents. Now, these so-called fallen angels were extremely scientifically advanced humanoid beings who came to Earth after being forced to exit their own planet or planets. They had been expunged by opposition forces and pursued across the galaxy into our solar system. And some scientists now are thinking that the sun, in the same way that even Frank Herbert was talking about bending space, and using even the sun as an event horizon. The concept is now coming into science through individuals like Nazim Haramein that the sun is even a black hole by which you can, fly between the galaxies. It's not my forte, but I just want to put that out there. So they arrived into our space, into our solar system. Upon arrival, they set up an unmanned makeshift decoy center on the planet Tiamat, which once existed between Mars and Jupiter, but they actually took refuge on our Earth here, in many of its underground caverns. Tiamat was a vast ocean planet in our solar system, known from antiquity as the second sun. It was 15 times larger than our Earth, and it was an entire ocean planet. An entirely ocean planet. It wasn't a sun, but its atmosphere was so resplendent that the actual sun's rays, when shining on Tiamat, made it appear to people on Earth that it was a sun. And it was known as the second sun from antiquity. If you think that's kind of odd, just remember that Venus is like the second or third brightest orb in the sky and actually casts a shadow on our Earth on a moonless night. And Allen and Dallaire, in their book Cataclysm, these are top scientists from Oxford and Cambridge. I quote them a lot in the Atlantis book, because the science is in, by the way. This is not just some hokomania. The science is in for every single thing that you're hearing today. If we elevate the moon to planetary status, they say, as the Sumerians appear to have done, then we have a total of 10 planets orbiting the sun. Now, if you're into Zachariah Sitchin, this is all old news to you. On this basis, one planet is currently still missing from the earlier Sumerian total. Could there really have been another planet known to the Sumerians, as yet unknown to us or lost since their day? Well, wait a minute, Tiamat ain't there. Well, we do know what lies between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt, right? That's right. Tiamat is not there today because it was destroyed by those pursuers of the Nephilim. This is what distinguishes my findings from Sitchin and from Velikovsky and others who research this field. Wonderful researchers, but I have found out something else, and that is that it was by humanoid. It wasn't some careering comets charging through our solar system. It was actually a humanoid intervention, the destruction of a planet 15 times larger than the Earth, made up entirely of oceans. Your enemy, you must think your enemy is pretty bad if you do that, right? But these guys were so convinced that the Nephilim were on Tiamat, they utterly obliterated, causing the almost unimaginable, magnetic storms and chaos in our universe. That is the event that caused the first flood. Tiamat's waters literally pouring down. And by the way, all the records talk about that. It's not waters coming up from below, it's waters raining down on you from the sky. Well, hell yeah. Do you know, in fact, as Allen and Dallaire have proven, that pre the deluge, pre the flood, we only had one ocean on this planet, and it was called the Miocene Ocean, and the remnants of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, if you're from Russia or Slovakia or from Estonia and from those Baltic lands, you'll know this, that the Caspian and the Black Sea have an interesting mythology. They're the remnants of the only ocean that we had before the deluge. All that Pacific and Atlantic and Indian Ocean, they're new. They just moved in. They're squatters. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, we read about it. It says, go and cut off Tiamat's life and let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Flowery language, granted. Mythological language, granted. But there it is. Go and cut off Tiamat's life, let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Now, one of the greatest documents that helps to reveal the whole history of the Nephilim is called the Book of Enoch. It should have been in the Bible, but it didn't get there. And behold, a star fell from heaven, it says, and the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them and to flee from them. And again I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Right? Just like Revelation says, a star fell from heaven. Now the Nephilim were not on Tiamat, as I said. They had descended to earth to hide. After the deluge, they emerged and set up their dummy base. Not their dummy base, but their actual base, known as Atlantis, on the vast continent of Appalachia. Appalachia is now beneath the waters, but it used to be England and Ireland, part of Scandinavia, the Arctic, Greenland and Iceland. You could walk the whole way. Atlantis is not a continent, like it's been told over and over again erroneously. Atlantis was on a continent. All right? You can go to Delhi and see beautiful English buildings, that the British troops and the British government built in all of their empire, but you wouldn't say that Delhi is London. Right? London's in England. So just because you you turn over a stone somewhere, like lots of researchers do, and they think, I found Atlantis. Every 2 years you hear somebody's found Atlantis. Atlantis was an empire. You can have outposts and bastions in all the corners of the world, but don't then run up for your own aggrandizement and say, I found Atlantis. Be specific. From there, they set about making contact with the Earth's indigenous inhabitants. The books of the old world tell us about it. The Bible, Genesis says, the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bear children to them. Okay, so they even tried to contact, for some reason, best known to themselves, they were interested in the earth women, only joking. And they tried to get involved with them, as you would. Anyway, the Gnostic texts tell us more about it. They say, now come, let us seize, I like that word, seize. Let us seize her, and let us cast our seed on her, so that then she is polluted, she will not be able to ascend to her light. But those whom she will beget will serve us. Gods need servants now? In the Ethiopia Kebra Nagast, this incredible book tells us that the daughters of Cain, with whom the angels had companied, conceived. They actually did conceive. But they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs, some died, and some came forth, having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. So this was some hideous, like Rosemary Baby Plus. It obviously didn't work very well. Another Gnostic text, please do not ask me to pronounce that. The daughters of darkness became pregnant as a result of the beauty of the forms of the emissary. As a result of the beauty of the forms of the emissary. That's exactly what Celtic mythology says. That the evil ones were incredibly handsome physically. In fact, in Gaelic, the term we still use today for beautiful, usbre, means beautiful. They'll see a beautiful child and they go, oh, he's such a bray. Right? And that was the king of the Nephilim from Irish mythology. It's a weird thing. Now, they say that, and the fruits of their bodies fell upon earth and consumed the blossoms of the trees. So then Samyaza, their leader, says to them, we have this quote from the book of Enoch and so on, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. Now, most scholars think that this sin refers to the physical impregnation we've just been talking about. Actually, sadly, unfortunately for us, the human race, it does not, in fact, mean that. A lot of beings have probably come to this planet, and probably still do. They do their little thing, they look at some rocks, they do their research, and then they're gone. They do not violate what Gene Roddenberry called the Prime Directive. The group that we are going to examine in a minute did do that. But it wasn't just the physical impregnation of the females that is the sin that is involved. That great sin, ladies and gentlemen, which we have to understand, was something else that happened approximately 30 to 50,000 years ago. And it was the transgenic experimentation, the genetic hybridization of our original forefathers that were on this planet. That means, very simply, the crossing of alien DNA. Humanoid, yes, but alien DNA with the DNA of our forefathers. In Genesis 1 we read, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let's not get into that whole thing about the hour right now. That's always been a bone of contention. I'd like to explore it, but we haven't got the time. Just let's focus on the fact that it's saying after our likeness. The gods are making man in their likeness. Corinthians backs this up. We read, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. 2 Adams? Well, wait a minute. How come we never learned that in Sunday school? What's this 2 Adams bit? The spiritual did not come first, says the passage, but the natural. And after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. So it sounds unspiritual until you decode it. They're literally telling you that the first man, Adam, was of the earth. And the second one is a creation from up there, from the heavens. He's spiritual. That word is so colored that we think it means something holy. It doesn't. It means not of the earth. Another term you might want to use in reference to this is the firstborn. This is a reference to these sons of the serpent, the first, beings that they created. This hybrid race, also known, I believe, as the race of the Elohim. So when you hear about the Jehovahs and the Elohims, that's what you're hearing about. The term that I prefer to use, more modern term in my book, is Homo Atlantis, because this being actually was created on Atlantis. And what a remarkable being indeed. And we're talking to the alien side, it's Mr. Spock, plus thousands of years. Very, very advanced technological beings. And then something else that the alien masters didn't have and probably didn't even understand. The human component, which I believe had the moral sensibility, the violet ray. At least it had the connection to the Earth Mother, the Matrix. A remarkable entity. And we are, in fact, descended from him. George Norrie asked me last night, do you mean that every single is there anybody with a pure, human blood? No, they're not. Every single being today has a various, cocktail of this. We're going to explore that more in a minute. However, the sons of the serpent, the Elohim, you see, had it all turned on. They were just equally intelligent, and I believe they're actually a little bit more, grounded and intelligent than even their masters. So to cut a very long story short, they decided that, wait a minute, this servitude bit, no, we're not into that gig. We want to, blow this status quo. So after an undiscernible time, undisclosed time, they decided to exodus. They decided to leave the continent of Appalachia, to vacate. And they did so, and they set up their own base on another continent on our planet at that time, which was known as Oceania, or better known as Lemuria. And they set up their own thriving culture there. And many of the scholars who look into this say that it's all the high culture, the Mozarts, the Beethovens, the Salvador Dali's, the whatnot. That's where that's coming from. Okay? Lemuria is an interesting name. Etymology tells us an awful lot. It means the land ancestral, land of the ancestors from Mu or Muhadevi, the Hindu mother goddess. This goddess was the personification of Lemuria itself, the motherland of humanity. Shiva, her counterpart, the great father of humanity. An Indian Tamil text, the Silabhadarakan, says that describes a lost continent in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. It calls the Kamai Nadu or the Kamari Kundum, that is, means the dragon land of the immortal serpent. The rebellion and exodus of the sons compelled the Atlanteans to return to their drawing boards. They began a second major hybridization program and created a Mark II being that we can call Adamic. These beings were of both sexes, but in the beginning they could not reproduce. They made excellent servants in the garden. Ancient chronicles, ancient texts, and sources. We know that when the conquistadors got to South America, Zamaraga and these bishops and cardinals were just burning and desecrating the ancient chronicles all over the world, but they especially did it in South America. I want to share with you a caption from a Mexican codices, one of the remaining books, and it's the Popol Vuh. It's one of only two, like the Dresden Codex, the Popol Vuh. I think that's about it, basically, that survived. I want to read this with you, and again, if this is any example of what these many burned books contained, and I do believe it is, we can understand why they were burned. The Popol Vuh says, and this is the God speaking, "Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked, to be remembered in earth? We have tried with our first creatures, but we could not make them venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who shall nourish and sustain us." Now the question immediately arises, why would gods need servants to nourish and sustain them? And what's this bit about the first creatures who wouldn't and the second ones who would? If this is an example of what was in those ancient books, we have now a handle on why it was so important for the ruling dynasties of the more later times to get rid of them. Same thing happened in Ireland, desecrations untold. And not only of books. In the Babylonian account, man is to be merely a slave brought into being by Marduk at the plea of the defeated rebel gods, so that those gods themselves need not be subjugated to servile labor. Man would be a puppet, a lowly primitive creature. The Epic of Atrahasis, which dates to about 1630 BC, found in the Assyrian Library of Nineveh. I'm sure Zacharias knows all about that book. It says that in a similar vein to the Enuma Elish, one of the main ideals is to show why man was created by the gods. It was so that they themselves need not work on the earth to produce their own food. Now, the alien geneticists did not desire a repeat of their first experiment. They realized that the error, the first time, the error had centered on the intelligence of their Mark I experiment. Therefore, in the Mark II experiment, Adamic man's intelligence would be confounded. Adamic man's intelligence would be confounded. Well, we hear about that, but we don't know we're reading it. Because the euphemism that has been used for that state of dumbed downness is the word naked. So just remember, when you read the word naked in the Bible or the other apocryphal works, that Adam and Eve were sent into the garden naked, please understand that it is a euphemism for being in a state of intellectual, psychological ignorance. It doesn't make any sense in the world to think of it, as physical nakedness. They were in a dumbed down state. Well, listen, you can sit in a laboratory now, or half an hour. They'll stick a few probes in your brain, and you'll be naked. You'll be dumbed down. They can do it in half an hour. Think what you could do if you had the power of the genome and the cell and the mitochondria. No problem. Genesis 3 says, "By the sweat of thy face will be thy bread." This is God, by the way. This is your God talking to his creations. "By the sweat of thy face will be thy bread, until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return." They give you the same line when they're putting you in the dirt now. When you go to a funeral, perk up, listen to that, and listen to the condescension that's behind it. My father died, he's not dust. Your parents have died, they're not dust. Who is this that calls our parents and the fallen of our planet the dust? Genesis 11 says, and the Lord said, look, the people are united and they all have but one language. Come on, let us go down and therefore confound their language so that they cannot understand one another's speech. Again, this is an oft-quoted and oft-researched passage. But the language is not verbal. All right? This is the language of the chemical soup. Now, thank God, we've come far. We can look back at this and understand it. This is the symbiotic, spiritual language that's being confounded. Genesis 3:22, and that number 322 is a very important number to secret societies, by the way. In Genesis 3:22, and the Lord God said, behold, the man has become as one of us to know good and evil. Now, lest he put forth his hand to take off the tree of life, we better get down there and do something. This is an implication that the first creatures did have full knowledge of good and evil, but this time that would not be permitted. So they had to do something. That term tree of life, by the way, is a term that relates to the DNA. DNA was known in the ancient times. I know most people don't believe that that's possible, but it was. The only thing was that they did not, portray or think of DNA as this sort of weird Lego set floating in hyperspace that they perpetually show you today on TV. They had a much more organic notion of it. It was a tree of 22 branches and roots, with its, roots in the earth and its branches in the heavens. It's the same symbol on the two coiling serpents, because they understood that it had a serpentine look. And this is probably a good juncture as to explain why the term serpent was used. It's not because they look like serpents. They look humanoid. The Semitic word for serpent is Nahash. And that word also has a second meaning of discovery, to find out. So evidently this refers to science. Therefore the Nephilim were super scientists. And the term serpent stuck because that's what it means. Because under the microscope they've actually looked at it, and the DNA helix looks like a serpentine shape. Therefore those who were the scientists, as the medical profession and conglomerate still use today, the caduceus of Hermes, right? Those who had the knowledge of that would wear the logo or be called the serpent people. Not because they had scales and looked like serpent people. In Genesis 2 it says, and the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. You see on the God who's doing this, you see what? The twin serpents of the DNA. You always see that if you look at the great mythologies of the world. The Indian shamans, Native American shaman, using the double, the serpents. In that previous picture, you not only saw the twin serpents, but you saw this thing that all the gods of Egypt hold. It's called the Ankh. And everybody's got a theory about the Ankh. It's meant to be breath, it's meant to be life, it's meant to be the union of opposites. And of course that's true. But actually, ancient people like Hebrew and the ancient languages did not use vowels. So we have many words come down to us that use only strong consonants, or what would have passed for consonants. The word Ankh, by the way, if you add in the other sound values, is actually the word Anu, right? N-K, Nakhi. So just know from now on that the Ankh, if you see the God holding the Ankh, it literally is the composite word of the word Anunnaki, which is known as the word for the fallen angels, or the gods from on high, Ananaje, the heavenly serpents. So that's what the Ankh really stands for. But we find serpent symbols all over the place. We find them in the modern milieu as well. We find words of power that we don't mean anything in English, but until you discover what is being said. What is the serpent that encoils Euroborically? What is the Pentium, the room of the five? Or the Serpentium? We have symbolism that has always troubled me. We've got Knights of Templar crosses, Maltese crosses. We've got green dragons crowned, devouring human beings. Where do these symbols come from? Why are they being used? The Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi, here's his house. Instead of having a paddling pool for the kiddies out in the front garden, now he prefers a black serpent eating a human being. I'd love to hear the story that he tells you when you ask him, hey mate, where you got that, black serpent in the garden that's eating a fella, He goes, it's a tattoo. But the fact of the matter is, even the positioning of these people's houses are on special vortexes. There's a subject that's very important to understand related to archoastronomy and geomancy about why, like the ancient fathers did this. They put symbols in the earth, did they not? Well, it's happening again. Freemasonry, we looked at the compass and the G earlier on, and of course researchers are always telling you the G represents, it's God, it's Gaia, it's geometry. No, it's not. The lowercase g, when it's done like that, is a little cryptic anagram for the serpent. That's why it's there. Because the Masons, now being infiltrated and so forth, right, are doing the work. That's why George, there's lots of kings called George. The Georgus, St. George and the Dragon, right? George and the Dragon, not James and the Dragon or Johnny and the Dragon. It's George and the Dragon. Because the G is important. Don't believe me? Think I'm making it up? They're happy to tell you. There is the serpent, G, in connection to the gene trust. And they're asking you to be a part of history. Yeah, their history. But we have to get symbolically literate because they're showing you ancient symbols out of the world of religion and theocracy and theology, right? Always when they're dealing with high-end science. We just think it's a cute design and don't think of it anymore. But everywhere you see something spiritual, it's always alongside high technology. Right? Every time you see something about genes, it's some meditation pose or spirituality. Every time you see the DNA, they're talking serpents and trees. Here's the one for the countdown of war, the latest war, when war was declared on Iraq recently. This is the cover of Time magazine. They're calling it a special report. But on the front cover, you don't see troops and, and tanks and whatnot. What do you actually see? Right? Here we have a countdown to war, but we get the main story is solving the mysteries of DNA. We're going to find out what the connection is, but look at the symbolism. Solving the mysteries of DNA, and they're showing you from the book of Genesis. The tree of life, the primal parents, and the DNA serpentine spiral. Did they know something we don't know? Now, the Lemurians, or the sons of the serpents, became aware of their creator's second experiments, you see. See, on Lemuria, this other coterie of basically enlightened beings, they're not dumb, They're watching their forefathers on Atlantis, thinking they might get up to this. So the Lemurians actually do become aware of their creator's second experiments. Now they have a dilemma, realizing that the race of Adam, you see, was in fact kindred to themselves. They both possessed the human DNA. It was therefore decided that representatives would be sent to Atlantis to dialogue with the enslaved and dumbed down Adams and Eves. Thus we have the story, corrupted later, of the serpent entering the garden. So the book of Genesis is completely upside down. Completely upside down. And if you study the artwork of the great masters who knew what we're talking about today, you will see in their symbolism of the androgynous serpent and how he's trying to free as opposed to tempt anyone. Now, the story goes, you see, that the sons entered into the gardens and spoke with their genetic cousins. They counseled them to throw off their chains of servitude and accompany them back to Lemuria, where they would be initiated into all that had been hidden from them. It is written that the Adams were resistant to the invitation. Right? The Adams were not getting it. But fortunately, the responses of the Eves was different. The ancient mythologies talk about that the Eves were mysteriously attracted to these visitors and were heeding them and are basically responsible for this exodus. This is very much important to know because it ties into why women have been marginalized henceforth. In fact, Madame Blavatsky puts it this way. She says the appellation Satan, that means the word Satan in the Hebrew, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, and not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. How right she is. And in book of Genesis we hear the hatred, you see, towards the female for doing this. This caption that we're going to read now is meant to be to the serpent, but it is not. It is to somebody else. And it says, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou wilt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Women committed a certain crime, quote unquote, 13,500 years ago, for which they have never been forgiven. That is why they have not held any office worth anything. Don't be fooled by what you see on today's history books. As Leonard Shlain puts it, when we look back across the historical time of patriarchy, there seems to be some terrible inevitability, a relentless desire to crush the female essence. And he admits it. This is a top scientist from San Francisco. But he admits it. The question of why is one of the most puzzling of our time. So we come full circle. What does this have to do with the origins of evil? In the preface of the Atlantis book, it says, during the next 10 years, the human race is destined to finally discover the true origins and destiny. As part of this discovery, we have to address the overwhelmingly important question of how the phenomena of evil came into the world and into the consciousness of Earth's human inhabitants. What we need to reveal now and understand is that it is this genetic, transgenic experimentation. It is exactly the consequences of this experimentation that caused what we now call the evil to come into existence. It's time for that fact to be known. It's not nature that did it. Nature, which is in perfect balance from the biggest neutron star to the smallest quanta. Why would it put a proclivity so deadly in its highest creation to undermine its own order? To even, embody such a monstrous idea is to be utterly under the worst kind of mind control. Because if nature is dumb and made a mistake and kind of blew it, then aren't we then justified in the slaughter of nature and the degradation of nature and the indigenous people that are also in harmony with nature and the animals which are our brethren and our teachers? Look what happens when you embody such a lie. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is constant tinkering and tampering with the inviolable laws of nature that cause such things like evil to come in the world. It's not some Darwinian blunder. What a notion. How dare we think that when we have a universe in perfect balance all around us? The very word Adam means cut off or divided. Adam comes from Adom, meaning the divided one. Well, yes, if you're divided inside, if you're schizophrenic inside, if you're bipolar, we're not even talking psychologically here, we're talking genetically, right? If you have bipolarity on that depth of your level, then it echoes through your being. If we are psychologically, emotionally, genetically schizoid, aren't we going to create a schizogenic society? So you can wave all the placards you want, and you can try to, mend the problem by running around in the streets and getting into the political pigsty. But haven't we seen that nothing's ever got done that way? Because we're not even focusing on the right place. We are generating it from within. You can't scrub the outside of a suitcase to clean the laundry inside. Well, you can try. It would be a comedy for everybody watching. Comic relief. But I think your laundry is going to remain exactly as dirty as it is. You can't make a dish and, just say, oh, I don't have any salt, but this stuff called sugar looks like the same, it'll do. And hope that you can exchange those two ingredients and that the dish is going to come out fine. Just because it looks the same. In fact, Leonard Slane, talking about this, recounts Plato, and we read something absolutely remarkable, which has meaning for everyone here. Zeus gathered the gods in council to express his concern that these unusual creatures would one day challenge their hegemony. He was loath to exterminate them with his thunderbolts, though, because there would be no one to bring the gods offerings. No hot coffee in the morning, no remote control for the TV, it sucks, He solved the problem by putting each creature into a trance and then splitting it down the middle. Upon awakening, each half only dimly remembered what it had been prior to being cleft in two. Zeus explained to the assembled gods and goddesses the cleverness of his scheme. These creatures would no longer pose a threat to the gods because they would dissipate their considerable energy by spending the rest of their days searching for their missing halves. Does that sound familiar? Leonard Slane goes on to say in another book, Eve's descendants have steadily accumulated the power to destroy each other in an unholy Armageddon, and like sleepwalkers are shuffling towards a planetary ecological disaster. How could a slight 5-foot-tall, two-legged animal create such sublimity and then wreak so much havoc in so minuscule an interval in Earth's history? You'll walk out that door and you'll know why. Erich Fromm, the great German sociologist and social critic, says that the detailed description of the life of primitive hunters and food gatherers has shown that man, at least as he fully emerged 50,000 years ago, was most likely not the brutal, destructive, cruel being, and hence not the prototype of man the killer that we find in more developed stages of evolution. So he's dating it. He's saying, say about before 50,000 years ago, there's no evidence to show that man had these capacities for inhumanity that we have now. And we've talked about it, I've talked about it, and even on a much higher level, philosophers and savants have always talked about it. It's a very serious question in life. What is the real difference between man, right, and the primates? Or man and beast? And the only trouble is, do you really want to know the answer? It isn't pretty. Man differs from the animal, all right, by the fact that he is a killer. He, the only primate that kills and tortures members of his own species without any reason, either biological or economic, and who feels satisfaction in doing so. I've lived in Ireland, I've seen it. Tolkien was in the trenches. He saw it. It is this biologically non-adaptive, non-phylogenetically programmed malignant aggression that constitutes the real problem and danger to man's existence as a species. The most ample and horrifying documentation for seemingly spontaneous forms of destructiveness are on the record of civilized history. The history of war is a report of ruthless and indiscriminate killing and torture whose victims are men, women, and children. Many of these occurrences give the impression of orgies of destruction, in which neither conventional nor genuinely moral factors have any inhibitory effect. There is hardly a destructive act human imagination could think of that has not been acted out again and again. Schlein says that in regards to aggression, creation is a nightmare spectacle taking place on a planet that has been soaked for hundreds of millions of years in the blood of all its creatures. The soberest conclusion we can make is that the planet is being turned into a vast pit of fertilizer. The major rise in killing prowess occurred primarily in the last 100,000 years, and look at this. The sharpest spike is limited to the last 40,000. I say that the net result is that post-Diluvian humanity, after we've been made schizoid, after we've had this splicing take place, the net result is that the post-Diluvian humanity is left with the consequences of their schizophrenia, with each person condemned like Hamlets to deal with their moral dilemmas as best they can. You're just stuck with it. You go and take care of it. Whatever. As Nobel laureate Konrad Lorenz said, man is the missing link between apes and human beings. I actually believe that because of this utterly, incredibly devastating effect on our biology, that the Lemurians, trying to offset the worst of that, trying to, after the Adams and Eves went to Lemuria, and the promise was that they try to condition out the alien DNA, or maybe even genetically, again, doubly interfere now, and try to remedy the problem. But I actually believe, just for your interest, because I know many of you are into the mystical tradition, I also believe, and we can talk about this later, that the yogic systems actually probably date from the time of Lemuria. They may have been devised for the express purpose of combating the alien proclivities or for conditioning out the alien DNA. These problematic yogic processes were merely one of the methods chosen to deal with his biological and psychological legacy. Basically, yoga had to do with cleansing and hygiene. It didn't have to do with meeting God and sitting at the right hand of Jesus and all that stuff. It had to do with cleaning your psyche. Many of the practices of yoga, which means to link back or tie together, make greater sense when understood in this context. It's just an interesting thing. However, when the Atlanteans found out that they're perfect slaves, when they wake up and there is no coffee and there is no remote control and there's no slippers under the bed, and then they go out and find out that their perfect slave has been seduced away by their first slave, they ain't happy. So unhappy are they that they actually unleashed a war, a global nuclear war on the Lemurians on our planet 13,000 years ago. The Lemurians, not being backward, retaliated. And we have, as all the mythologies of the world, I'm sorry, if you're not familiar with mythologies, this is going to come as like a big shock and you're not going to believe it. But do your homework and you'll find out that all the mythologies of the world talk about this, the war of the gods. And when they're talking about the war of the gods, they're also talking about the super weaponry involved. And they're also talking about psychic abilities, psychic violence taking place. This incredible global nuclear war is meant to have irradiated all the moisture in our atmosphere and also caused, magnetic storms in the ionosphere and in the Roche field limit. It had devastating consequences. And I actually believe that the radiation and fallout from that may actually have created some of the idioms that we read when we're talking about the gods. Their gigantic height, the giants, or the pied nature of their skin, or the three eyes, all that famous stuff from mythology. You can take it either way. Either the giants came here and they were giants already. Huge. I actually do believe that also. But I think another contributing factor was simply the fallout. So when you're reading these weird, anecdotes and you go, this is nonsense, this is for the kids. Think again. The radiation and fallout can cause those peculiarities that you read about in the descriptions of Osiris, and Set and all the different gods and the way that they appeared. Here's the dig that's happening now in Saudi Arabia, digging up the gods. And nuclear radiation is thought to have dramatically affected the pineal and pituitary glands, the endocrine system, and the DNA. This, together with massive changes in earth magnetism, led to all kinds of biological maladies. Giantism, disfigurement, vampirism, autism, hyperpigmentation, carnivorousness are all thought to have related to this. You look at the cave art you see in the Venus of Willendorf's figures, and even the little people. What's that all about? All over the world, human footprints have been found alongside dinosaur tracks. Some of those footprints are 15 inches long. But these tracks of human beings have been seen, as Michael Cremo and Graham Hancock have exposed, you see, have been found alongside dinosaurs. So have we been sold a lie about the dinosaurs? Are they reptilian creatures, ordinary reptiles that have been, their organs have been affected by the fallout? And then to hide this fact, they're telling us, oh, they were millions of years ago. We know now that they weren't millions of years ago. So then how did they get to that size? Now here's one of the most important statements, because a lot of you have researched this interesting information from other scholars like Zachariah Sitchin and so on. However, has something struck you that's odd? Here we are, I believe it's May 27th, Conspiracy Con, Bay Area, California. How come we're still talking about this? What we're describing happened 13,000 years ago. That's a hell of a long gap. If there's a war of the gods, how come there's no denouement? How come there's no conclusion? How come we're even still talking about this now? Because look, it's obvious, isn't it? If the Atlanteans had won, we'd all be troglodytes, slaves. And if the Lemurians had won, then we'd be living in peace and harmony on a beauteous, planet in harmony. Since neither of those two things are a fact, then there must have been some variable that offset the ending. I don't know why the other scholars have not noticed this. It's always perplexed me as to why that is. There was a variable, all right. That variable, ladies and gentlemen, was the polar shift, the axial shift of our Earth, precipitated by the ferocity of the war that I described. And neither party was ready for it. Neither party knew too much about the Earth. They were recent visitors here. They didn't know too much about the ultraviolet light, the Schumann waves, and even the size of the planet and all of that. They had no idea of understanding how the planet Earth would respond with a violence of its own to their unimaginable violence. They weren't prepared for it. Now, deluge, water, boulders and stuff pouring down from the heavens in the famous 40 days of rain and whatnot is pretty cataclysmic. But the Earth does recover from that after a given period of time. Pole shift is something else again. Pole shift is, the Eiffel Tower sticking head first in Hawaii. Pole shift is boulders the size of mountains flying through the air. Pole shift is the mass extinction of almost all the flora and the fauna on the planet. It's all etched inside your racial memory, by the way. I know that the psychologists have fooled you into thinking that a lot of your psychological fears and phobias are psychological in nature. No, they're not. They're physiological in their nature. They're your memory of these very events that happened in a blink of the eye ago, historically speaking. And that is the reason why none of this is here anymore. Because not one, it's another piece of disinformation, not one continent sank beneath the ocean, but at least 4. Avalon, remember famous Avalon? And Lyonnais. But actually there was massive continents. Appalachia sinks beneath the waves. Tyrrhenia, Oceania, Beringia, Furnascandia. And the Miocene Ocean, they say, tipped out of its basin and became the Mediterranean. What the Mediterranean is today is the old Miocene Ocean, and all that got left was the Black and Caspian Sea. You can't imagine the havoc. Allen and Dallaire go into describing it in their books. I have abstractions in my book of their work and talk about it also.